The 12,000-strong crowd at Detroit's Cobo Hall was screaming for "Break On Through," the Doors' wildest, most energetic song, and Morrison would normally take the stage like a whirlwind. But on that November night in 1969, Morrison suddenly stopped in the middle of the song. He just stopped. The band kept playing, but Morrison held the microphone and scanned the crowd, searching for something. If you lived through that era, you know how strange silence feels at a rock concert. Especially during a Morrison performance when you expect everyone to go wild. Fans in the front rows followed Morrison's eyes and looked where he was looking. On the left side of the arena, in the crowd, sat a young man in a wheelchair. Military uniform, short hair, his legs immobile. A Vietnam veteran. What Morrison did that night wasn't just stop a concert. It was bring a generation's trauma, a war's guilt, and a forgotten hero before 12,000 people. After that moment, no one in Detroit ever saw Morrison as just a rock star. They saw him as something else. If you like stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. Detroit was a city of tension in November 1969. The Vietnam War was entering its 4th year, and every day officers in military uniforms would knock on another family's door and begin sentences with, "We regret to inform you." Detroit, the Motor City, was paying a particularly heavy price. The sons of factory workers, the children of fathers working on the automotive assembly line, were dying on the front lines. The slogan, "Bring them home," written on the city's walls, protests and peace signs were everywhere. But the most painful thing was those who returned. Some in coffins, some in wheelchairs, all changed. It was no coincidence that Detroit's Cobo Hall was packed that night. People weren't just coming to listen to the Doors. They were coming to escape, to forget, to be in a world without Vietnam, without Nixon, without the daily death tolls for a few hours. Jim Morrison was fighting his own battle in those days. 8 months after the Miami scandal, the court case was still ongoing. The FBI file was growing thicker. Concert promoters were afraid to book Morrison. But his real battle was internal, with his father, the cold Admiral George Morrison. Morrison's father wasn't just any soldier. He was the commander of the Gulf of Tonkin incident that triggered the Vietnam War. Every time Morrison took the stage, he was declaring war on the system his father represented. Every "fuck the system" shout, every anti-authority song was a son's rebellion against his father. Morrison carried this weight on his way to the Detroit concert. The blood of the young men killed in the war. His father was, metaphorically, on his hands too. The day of the concert, Detroit was cold and gloomy. The grey November sky covered the city. The fans gathering in front of Cobo Hall were mostly young, between 18 and 25, that dangerous age range, draft age. Some had just received their draft notices. Some had just returned from Vietnam. Some had lost friends. The Doors weren't just a band to these young people. Morrison had become the voice of their anger, their rebellion, their helplessness. Listening to "Break On Through" wasn't just listening to music. It was trying to tear down the walls of the system, at least in their minds. The young man in the wheelchair was Michael Thompson. He was 22 that night, or maybe 23 because it was his birthday. He had been a soldier for 18 months, had been in Vietnam at 19, and had lost everything at 20 in a mine explosion. He had left both his legs in the muddy fields of Vietnam, but what he had really lost was something else. His future, his dreams, that light feeling of being young. He had spent 9 months at Walter Reed Hospital, undergone 12 surgeries, countless physical therapy sessions, heard countless "you're lucky to be alive" comments. But Michael didn't feel lucky. At night, in his sleep, he was in Vietnam, hearing the explosion, hearing his friends scream. During the day, he faced the cold reality of Detroit. People looked at him with pity. Some said, "Thank you for your service." But most just looked away. For Michael's birthday, his friends wanted to do something special. His friends from before Vietnam, his high school friends, the war hadn't changed them, but it had changed Michael a lot, and now there was an invisible wall between them. Someone had heard that the Doors were playing in Detroit, and they remembered. Michael used to listen to the cassette tape until "Light My Fire" played in his senior year of high school. This would be the best gift, they had said to each other. Getting the ticket hadn't been easy. Arranging a special area for the wheelchair had been even harder, but it was worth it to make Michael smile. Michael didn't really want to go to the concert. He said, "I don't want people to pity me," but his friends insisted. "Jim Morrison doesn't pity anyone," they said. "He sees the wounds the system creates." When they entered Cobo Hall, Michael held his breath. 12,000 people, music, energy, life. For the first time since Vietnam, he felt alive, or at least among living people. The space reserved for his wheelchair was on the left side of the arena, a little far from the stage, but close enough. The people around him first saw the wheelchair, then noticed the military uniform, then turned their heads. Some whispered, "Thank you." Some just gave a sad smile. Michael knew this. Soldiers who didn't die in war carried a mixture of shame and pity from society. Had he died, he would have been a hero. Because he lived, he was just a reminder. When the lights went out, Cobo Hall went wild. When the Doors took the stage, the screams of 12,000 people shook the walls of the building. Ray Manzarek sat down at his keyboard, touched the keys of that iconic Vox organ. Robbie Krieger hung his guitar. John Densmore settled behind the drums. And then Morrison came. Leather pants, bare chest, those wild hair, that magnetic gaze. When Michael saw him, something stirred inside him. This man was free. This man wasn't playing the system's game. This man wasn't living the life his father wanted for him. Michael wondered for a moment what he could have been. If there had been no Vietnam, if he had legs, if he weren't sitting in this wheelchair. When Break On Through started, Cobo Hall turned into an explosion of energy. Morrison was like a shaman on stage, like a whirling dervish, the human form of electricity. He was shouting the words, calling out to the crowd, calling out to tear down the walls. The first 2 minutes were beyond normal. Morrison was lost in himself. The music was flowing through him. The crowd was going wild with him. Even Michael, with his immobile legs in his wheelchair, was caught up in the music, keeping time with his hands, nodding his head. For the first time in months, he had forgotten the pain. But then Morrison saw. Right in the middle of the song, as Morrison turned on stage and looked out at the crowd, his eyes locked on Michael. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The look on Morrison's face changed. The energy was still there, but something else had been added. Recognition, understanding, something. Morrison pulled the microphone away from his mouth. He was supposed to sing the lyrics, but he didn't. Ray Manzarek kept playing the keyboard, Robbie and John too, but Morrison's voice was gone. The crowd didn't notice at first. The music was too loud, the energy too intense. But then Ray turned his head, looked at Morrison, and saw Morrison was frozen, staring at the crowd, staring at something. Ray slowed down, then Robbie, then John. The music faded, stopped. 12,000 people were suddenly plunged into silence. What was happening? Why wasn't Morrison singing? Was it a stage malfunction, a health issue, or Morrison's famous unpredictability? The crowd waited, curious, anxious, bewildered. Morrison held the microphone in his hand, panting, sweating, but his eyes were still fixed on that spot. The wheelchair, the military uniform, that young face. Morrison slowly walked to the edge of the stage. The spotlight followed him. He put his hand over his eyes to see better and pointed. The crowd looked where Morrison pointed. Thousands of heads turned. Thousands of eyes followed, and they saw the soldier in the wheelchair. The silence in that section of the arena deepened. The people around looked at Michael. Michael looked at Morrison. Morrison looked at Michael. Time seemed to stand still. Morrison brought the microphone to his mouth. His voice was soft, very different from the wild sound of the scene. "What's your name, soldier?" Morrison said. The sound system carried this quiet question throughout the arena. Michael froze. Was he talking to me? Was Morrison calling him? His friends around him touched Michael lightly, whispering, "He's talking to you." Michael opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Morrison waited. 12,000 people waited. Finally, Michael's trembling voice came. "Michael." It wasn't loud enough. Morrison couldn't hear it. Morrison stepped further forward from the edge of the stage, almost as if he were going to jump. "I can't hear you, soldier. What's your name?" Michael spoke louder this time. "Michael!" Morrison smiled. That rare, genuine Morrison smile. "Michael," Morrison said, rolling the name. "How old are you today, Michael?" Today, birthday. Michael's friends were surprised. How did Morrison know it was his birthday? He didn't, actually. But Morrison knew in that moment that this moment was special, that this moment should be a gift. 22, Michael replied. Morrison nodded. 22, he repeated. Whole life ahead of you. Whole life you gave for... He stopped. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Everyone knew. For Vietnam, for the war, for other people's decisions. Morrison turned to his band. Ray, John, Robbie, he said. But the microphone wasn't on, just lip movement. The band members approached. Morrison said something to them. Ray raised his eyebrows. Robbie smiled. John nodded. Then Morrison turned to the crowd. He held the microphone with both hands, as if about to say a prayer, and spoke. Tonight is Michael's birthday, Morrison said. He's 22 years old. He went to Vietnam. He gave his legs for a war he didn't start, for politicians he didn't elect, for a country that sent him to hell and brought him back broken. Silence. Deep, heavy silence. Some people had even started to cry. So, I think, Morrison continued, we should do something special for Michael. I think 12,000 people should sing Happy Birthday to a real American hero. At first, the crowd didn't know what to do. Were they going to sing Happy Birthday? At a rock concert? But then something happened. From the back of the arena, from the upper tiers, someone started. Happy birthday to you. Slowly, hesitantly. Then others joined in. Happy birthday to you. More voices, more people. Ray Manzarek began playing a simple, soft melody on the keyboard, supporting the Happy Birthday tune. Morrison raised the microphone like an orchestra conductor, and 12,000 people began to sing. Happy birthday, dear Michael. Happy birthday to you. The sound was incredible. 12,000 voices all at once, All for one man, the man in the wheelchair. Tears streamed from Michael's eyes. He couldn't control it anymore, and it didn't matter. The people around him put their hands on his shoulders, some crying, some laughing. When the song ended, applause erupted. But this wasn't normal applause. It was a surge, a catharsis, a collective mix of crying and laughing and anger and love. But Morrison wasn't done. As soon as the song ended, Morrison left the stage. Literally, he jumped off the stage. Security tried to stop him, but Morrison pushed past them. He made his way through the crowd. People parted, and Morrison came to Michael's side. He knelt in front of the wheelchair. His eyes met Michael's. He wasn't a rock star anymore, just a man looking at another man. "Thank you for your sacrifice," Morrison said, his voice breaking. Then he hugged him. Morrison, the Lizard King, the rebel, the authority figure, was hugging a Vietnam veteran and crying. Michael was crying too. They were both crying. Hundreds of people around them were crying. Morrison whispered something else in his ear. The microphone didn't pick it up, but those nearby heard. "Fuck the war. Fuck them all. You deserved better." Morrison stayed there, next to Michael, for a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Then he slowly got up, touched Michael's shoulder one last time, and returned to the stage. Security guards helped him onto the stage. When Morrison turned to the microphone, his face was wet with tears, his makeup smudged, but he didn't care. He looked out at the crowd. 12,000 pairs of eyes were watching him. 12,000 people were witnesses to this moment. "That's what we should be doing," Morrison said. "Not sending kids to die. Not destroying families. Not making heroes out of survivors and ghosts out of the dead." Applause erupted, but Morrison stopped it, gesturing with his hand. "No applause for me. I didn't do anything." Michael did. Michael and all the Michaels out there. All the kids who went and came back different or didn't come back at all. From that moment on, the concert became something else entirely. Morrison sang the rest of the songs, but with a different energy, deeper, more meaningful, less show, and more real. The performance of The End was particularly unforgettable. As Morrison sang that Oedipal section, he was metaphorically killing not just his own father, but all the fathers who wage war, the entire system that sacrifices its children. The crowd absorbed every word, felt every note. This was no longer just a concert. It was a collective therapy session, a collective lament, the release of a generation's pain. When the concert ended, Morrison looked at Michael one last time before leaving the stage. Michael was looking at him. Something passed between them, an understanding, a thank you, a farewell. Morrison placed his hand on his chest, then gestured to Michael. A salute of respect, not a soldier's salute, but a human salute. Michael did the same. Then Morrison left and never returned to that stage. Backstage was chaos. Band members, producers, technical crew. Everyone was talking about what Morrison had done, why he had done it, what it would do to his career. But Morrison was silent. He sat in a corner, holding a bottle of whiskey, thinking. Ray Manzarek came over, touched his shoulder. "That was beautiful, Jim," Ray said. Morrison looked up, his eyes red. "He's 22, Ray, 22. My father sent kids like him to die, and I'm here singing songs." Ray didn't know what to say, because Morrison was right. What could be said? That night, the local Detroit newspapers wrote the story. They ran headlines like, "Jim Morrison stops concert for wounded vet." But the real story wasn't in the papers. It was in the hearts of the 12,000 people who were there. The people who went home that night were changed. Some hugged their families and said, "I love you." Some wrote letters to their brothers in Vietnam. Some burned their draft cards. They all understood something. Humanity was more important than the system. Love was stronger than war. A momentary connection could be more powerful than 1,000 sermons. Michael Thompson changed after that night. He was still in a wheelchair, still without legs, still haunted by Vietnam nightmares. But something was different. He no longer felt invisible. Jim Morrison, one of the world's most famous rock stars, had seen him. 12,000 people had sung "Happy Birthday" to him. This was not a forgotten soldier. This was a man honored. In the years that followed, Michael founded a support group for Vietnam veterans in Detroit. He traveled city to city in his wheelchair, telling veterans, "You are not alone." At every meeting, he recounted that night, how Morrison looked into his eyes, that embrace, that whisper. "Fuck the war," he said. And every time he told the story, people cried, because that moment wasn't just for Michael. It was for thousands of Michaels, tens of thousands of Michaels. Years later, a journalist asked Michael, "What affected you most that night?" Michael thought long and hard. "It wasn't Morrison being famous," he said finally. "It was him looking at me like a human being. He didn't pity me. He didn't applaud. He didn't shout slogans of thanks. He just saw me. He really saw me. And in that moment, I understood that being seen was more valuable than anything." Morrison never spoke of that night. In interviews, concerts, private conversations, he never recounted that moment in Detroit. But the band members knew. Ray Manzarek would say years later in an interview, "The Detroit night changed Jim." After that, there was less ego and more empathy on stage. It was as if that boy in the wheelchair had taught Jim something. The meaninglessness of fame, the importance of human connection, where the real struggle lies. More than 50 years have passed since that Detroit concert. Michael Thompson died in 2003 at the age of 75, but he left the stories he told that night as a legacy to his children and grandchildren. Most of the 12,000 people who were at that concert are no longer alive, but they too passed on the story. One generation telling the next how Jim Morrison honored a Vietnam veteran. What Morrison did that night was actually a simple gesture, stopping a concert, asking a name, having the crowd sing "Happy Birthday," hugging. But that simple gesture did something no political speech, no protest song, no manifesto could do. It saw a human being. He stopped not for a system, but for a person. And perhaps the most rebellious thing Morrison did in his career was not to fight the system, but to make it forget itself for a moment and simply remember humanity. What happened that night at Cobo Hall was not a rock concert. It was a memorial, a confession, a search for forgiveness, a farewell, all at once. The generation that went to Vietnam, the generation that returned, the generation that was lost, they were all among those 12,000 people. And Morrison gave them a moment when their pain was acknowledged, their losses were seen, their sacrifices were told, they were not in vain. Was it enough? No. Would it bring Vietnam back? No. But that moment, that embrace, that happy birthday, perhaps it was the best thing that could be done. When Jim Morrison died in Paris in 1971, the flowers sent by Michael Thompson were among the first placed on the grave at Père Lachaise Cemetery. The card simply read, "Thank you for seeing me, Michael."